Have you ever wondered what it's like to leave your 9 to 5, invest in real estate, and completely change the direction of your life? Well, today's guest did exactly that, and he's here to tell you what you need to know.
In this episode, we are sitting down with Clint Harris, a guy who went from medical sales to dominating it in the real estate game. He's going to take us through his entire strategy and kind of break down how he got there.
But it's more than just numbers and deals. Clint talks about the importance of building the right mindset to make a transition like this possible. You're not just gaining financial independence, it's about achieving freedom in every area of your life: financial, time, and location.
And that's what really sets this episode apart. Clint explains how all three of those, time, money, and location freedoms, work together to create not just a stable financial platform, but also a meaningful life.
You'll learn how to think strategically about real estate investing, whether you're starting from scratch or looking to pivot into a new area like self-storage. Plus, Clint offers some golden advice on networking and surrounding yourself with the right people to accelerate your success.
So if you've been dreaming about quitting your day job and taking control of your financial future, and or just leveling up your investments, you won't want to miss what Clint has to offer today.
So, by the end of this episode, you'll walk away with some actionable steps to start on your own real estate journey. And more importantly, the mindset in order to make it a reality. So, stick around, get ready to take some notes, because Clint is about to drop some serious knowledge on us.
Let's get started. So what got you into podcasting? Or should we save that for the actual pod?
I mean, raising capital, right?
Yeah.
Just needing to raise capital. So it's obviously a great platform there, but it's a vehicle to raise capital, but I don't want to use it as a sales pitch, right? So I've used it as here's the deal. Okay. So if I know what my conversion rate is on, let's say I'm raising 10 million bucks, right?
Mhm.
And the average person's going to put in 100 grand. I'm making up round numbers, but okay. And then out of everybody that I talk to, that's kind of an investor, like in some level, an investor, maybe 10% of them are interested in what we're doing with self-storage conversions. And maybe 10% of them are going to come in. Okay. So that's 1% of everybody I talk to is going to come in with an average of 100 grand. Well, then if I need $10 million, you can do the math, right? So how many investors do I need to get there? And it's going to come down to something like I need to speak to 10,000 people or 15,000 people, depending on what the conversion rate is, right? But you can do the math. It's a word problem. So you navigate to what the conversion rate is, what the average dollar amount is going to be. And then you look at how much you're trying to raise and what the time frame is. Am I going to start a podcast and speak to 15 or 20,000 people? Absolutely not. But the podcast that I'm using is not to reach those people. It's to get me on your podcast, right? Podcasting is very transactional. So I started a podcast called Truly Passive Income, and it's the aggressive pursuit just from an educational standpoint on truly passive income and being able to share that. Obviously, passivity is always on a spectrum. I use that to go find other people that have a podcast platform that they've been building up for 2, 3, 4 years. Maybe they have a couple thousand people that listen, and maybe it's a medical field podcast about people that are looking to, well, that's my language. I implanted pacemakers for 16 years, right? So I can go on his podcast instead of being part of the noise of a weekly real estate podcast. This is a medical podcast about different types of investing. I can be one of 2 or 3 people in a year, and I'm reaching 3,000, 4,000 people there. And it worked because I invited them on my podcast first. We engaged, so they ultimately invite me back onto their podcast. So I don't need to grow a podcast that can reach 20,000 people, but I can use mine as a platform to get on other people's podcasts in front of 50,000 people. And that's where the conversion rate is, because it's a quid pro quo kind of thing. So this is the 40th podcast that I've been a guest speaker on in the last 6 months.
Beautiful. That's interesting. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. I know a lot of people come from the stance of, well, I want people to hear what I have to say, but you're kind of flipping the script on that and really using it as a way to not just grow your net worth, but grow other people's net worth and really grow the knowledge of like what you have in store and what you learn.
Yeah, I'm an extrovert. I'm passionate about connecting with people, and relationships are important anyway.
Mhm.
But on top of that, like, I really believe that what we're doing is helping, and I want to, if you're doing your own podcast, it's a little bit like screaming into the void, right? You don't really know how that's being received on the other end. And that's part of it, but I flipped that around, and my podcast is not about trying to get exposure. It's about finding the best, smartest, most intelligent people I can and interviewing them. That's fast forwarding me. If I ask that guy to go have lunch with me,
Mhm.
they're going to say no, probably. Right. But if I say I've got a podcast, I want to give you a platform to talk about what you're doing. Absolutely. They're happy to do that and give me an hour of their condensed life experience. Like I had, I had John Hewitt on our podcast probably 2 months ago. John Hewitt is the founder of Jackson Hewitt Tax Service. He built that up to 4,000 locations and sold it for $500 million. Then he started Liberty Tax Service and he built that up to 3,000 locations and sold it for $500 million. Somehow he heard my podcast and had his executive assistant reach out and ask if he could be a speaker. I was like, yes. And the next week I drove to Virginia Beach and I had dinner with him and we spent 6 hours I learned a ton. That my podcast is just about helping me get better and sharing that with as many people as I can. And it's also to get me on other people's podcasts. That's the platform for capital raising.
Yeah, so you really have to be an extrovert when it comes to raising capital, correct? And really putting yourself out there, maintaining those relationships.
I don't think you have to be, but it certainly helps me. A lot of people feel my passion because I'm excited about what we're doing, and that just comes from my personality, I think. So, but you certainly don't have to be. Takes all kinds, you know. I'm blabbing too much. What's my download at?
No, you're all good. You're all good. We're gonna keep all that in because I liked it.
So are we recording? Okay, good.
Yeah, why not? So for our audience members, will you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your history, what you're currently doing today. You know, I know you just shared a little bit there, but let's kind of walk back through it.
Sure. My name's Clint Harris, 41 years old, married, 2 little boys, 5 and 1.5. I live in Carolina Beach, North Carolina. I had a 16-year career in medical sales, implanting pacemakers and defibrillators, working in cardiology. So in the lab, putting in devices or on call nights and weekends. It's not a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday kind of job. So demanding job. I was blessed to be pretty good at it, but it's kind of a young man's game. And I always knew that if I ever wanted an off-ramp from that lifestyle, I was going to have to build it. I think it's gotten progressively harder every generation for people to save their way to retirement. So I wanted to create an option as an off-ramp from that. So I chose real estate as a way to do that. Bought my first house was a duplex. I didn't know what house hacking was, but that's what I was doing at the time in my early 20s. And then built up a small portfolio of 9 single-family homes over a couple years. Figured out it's a very slow way to get ahead. Doesn't scale very well. You're cannibalizing your cash flow anytime you do a refinance. And then flipped a couple houses, did a few other small various projects. In 2017, my wife and I moved to Wilmington, North Carolina for me to take over the medical sales territory. That's the first time we lived in an area near the beach that had the opportunity for short-term rentals. So in 2018, I remembered that first lesson from my first house, bought a duplex 2 blocks off the beach, 3-bed, 2-bath in each half. We moved into one, we Airbnb the other half. We did $57,000 our first summer and we were like, oh, this is real. So it paid for everything and we were getting paid on top of that to live at the beach. So then we went and bought a quadplex, converted it to 4 Airbnb units, then another quadplex, then another quadplex, then built a house, then started a property management company with some partners that we still own. So we still have 14 Airbnbs and co-own a property management company. Did most of that wrong. And there's a lot to unpack there about our motivations. And then in 2020, I moved into self-storage, specifically buying old Kmart buildings and big box retail buildings with partners and converting them. And that's really where our life changed in a big way in terms of the financial velocity.
Wow. That's impressive to say the least. Wow. That's awesome.
I'm glossing over a lot of mistakes, my man.
Of course,
there's a lot that we did wrong. But it did lead us to, I left medical sales in 2022. Mm-hmm. I've been a full-time real estate investor ever since. I'm one of the general partners of a group called Nomad Capital.
Curious to see what changed when you went from the quadplexes and that whole business. I assume it's a lot different from the initial single-family homes, moving over to Airbnb, a lot more working parts. It's more of a business rather than quote-unquote passive investments. What's the difference between the single family and the Airbnb?
Yeah, so obviously the renovation side of that is very similar, but you nailed it. Is that now it's a business, right? We're operating a system, and we have to put in automation and streamlining and vertical integration and things like that, because you're actually running a property as a business. You know, the value of multifamily is, it's very easy to see, right? You got one set of fixed overhead, but you got 2 or more units. In terms of the properties themselves, single family, it is what it is. When you convert to multifamily, there's a change there. But the real key here is that I was buying multifamily properties that had bad long-term month-to-month tenants in them. Over time, I'm moving out the tenants and I'm renovating the property, which that's not new, but I'm converting it to an Airbnb, right? I'm changing the asset class. When you change the asset class, you change the formula by which the asset is valued. I could take a quadplex, say I got 4 tenants in there paying $1,000 a month, and then I convert it to an Airbnb, and each of those 4 units is making $40,000 a year. It significantly changes the net operating income of the property, which changes the valuation. So that asset class conversion, or adaptive reuse, whatever you want to call it, it 3 to 4x is the gross potential rental income. And then your job is minimizing expenses through the operations and the cleaning fees and vertical integration of having cleaners and stuff like that on staff. And it's honestly harder to manage 1 or 2 Airbnbs than it is to manage 8 or 10. Right? Because you're a big enough book of business for cleaners and handymen and HVAC technicians and everything else, and you get some redundancy of systems.
Definitely.
So that's the difference. What I did wrong was that I was focused on cash flow to reach a level of financial independence. Right? That's what we all want. It's a buzzword. It's a marketing term. Financial freedom. How do we get there? Well, personal opinion, I think it's a trash goal. I mean, it's part of it, right? But it's really shallow. When I replaced my income of what I was making in medical sales, I was still basically on call. I had a phone on me all the time. I'm dealing with problems. I got 8 to 10 tenants in each of these units every month. I can't go anywhere for the summer. And so the financial independence aspect of it was not what we really all want. What we're really looking for is time, financial, and location independence. Those 3 things together create an independence of purpose. So when I built up a first portfolio of single family homes, it was not going to scale and get me where I wanted to be financially. So I tore that down and built a small portfolio of Airbnb properties. Now, it hit the level of financial independence, but it did not come with the time and location independence. So because of that, my options were to tear that portfolio down and start over, or the issue was I couldn't find a property manager that could manage those properties and make the same numbers that we were making. Nobody's going to mind your business the way that you mind your business, right? So the problem was that I couldn't find someone that could take that over. So we had to build a property management company that could do that. And it took 2 years. It was a huge chunk out of my life. I've got some incredible operating partners. The reality is I operated that and built it for 2 years. And over time, I realized that they're better than I am. I read the book Who Not How by Dan Sullivan and realized that I don't need to know how to do all these things. I need to know who I have that's better at doing these things than I am. So I stepped back and I hired myself out of the company, and my partner and one of our managers, who's now made partner, are operating it, and it thrived. It's doing better than it ever was when I was in charge, which is humbling, right? It's like, that kind of stings. But the reality is it's better for my properties. It's better for everybody. So I stepped out and then took a really hard look. I was like, okay, this is the 3rd time I'm trying to pick a strategy. And I'm asking myself the same question every time. It's like, what's the highest and best use of every dollar that I have to invest right now in terms of asset class, geography, everything? But now the switch has changed, right? I moved the goalpost, because it used to be, what's the highest and best use of every dollar I have to invest to achieve the most cash flow? That's not the question anymore. What's the highest and best use of my time, energy, and money that I need to invest to make sure that I'm achieving time, financial, and location independence? Because those are the things that are going to give me an independence of purpose in my life that affects the amount of time I get to spend with my children and the quality of people that they probably turn into, right? It's a bigger question. And so that led me to looking at who'd done it before me. The people around me, the successful investors that are 20, 30, 40 years farther down the road from me, what do they do? And the things that kept coming up over and over were mobile home parks, hard money lending, and self-storage. I was burned out on tenants because of the short-term rentals. I wasn't interested in mobile home parks. I didn't have 7 figures to start lending or hard money lending unless I liquidated everything. And that left storage. And I was like, okay, let me think about this. Self-storage, you're renting someone a box of air. There's no kitchens, there's no bathrooms, there's no one living in the property. This sounds pretty good. I'm looking at the expense ratio. A multifamily apartment complex could be 60 to 70% expense ratio, and the other 30 to 40 is your net operating income. Storage is like 30% expense ratio, 70% net operating income. The higher the net operating income, the easier it is to, I'm not going to say manipulate, but like you can change the value of a commercial property massively if you can adjust the net operating income. So all that appealed to me. I'm a big proponent of networking. That's why I'm excited to connect with you guys today and have a chance for us to meet. Because who we are right now is the same investor we're likely to be 10 years from now, with the exception of the places we go, the people we meet, the content that we consume, right? So because of that, I've always done a lot of networking, and I met my partners through the local networking real estate meetups in Wilmington, North Carolina in 2019. We helped each other with some individual projects that we were working on. They were doing hotels and I was doing Airbnbs and property management. And then in 2020, they had a background of having developed self-storage years ago and were just starting to get back into it. So in end of 2020, we bought a Kmart building. So I put money in, they put money in, and then we raised, I think, around 700 grand from a couple of the cardiologists that I work with. Like, those are my people, right? All my friends are white coat professionals, right? So they put some money in, I did. We got some money from our investors. We bought an old Kmart building for 1.5 million. We put 2.5 into it, and as a stabilized facility, it's worth 9. And I was like, oh, this is real money, right? And so then we did another one, another Kmart in Danville, Virginia. And then we did an old textile mill, and then we did another project, and then another project. And then I left medical sales in 2022. Over the last 3.5 years, we've done 2 Kmarts, 3 warehouses, 2 textile mills, a grocery store, an old soda bottling facility. Right now, we're wrapping up conversion on a textile warehouse as well as a brewery. We have 2 more under contract. Not counting those, we're at $150 million worth of assets under management. We've never sold anything. The average deal looks like we'll buy a building for $1 to $2 million. We'll put $2 to $3 million into it. As a stabilized self-storage facility, they're typically in the $13 to $15 million range. We can do a cash out refinance, pay out all the investors and ourselves, try to double everybody's money, tax-free because it's not a sale. We do a cash out refi, and then we hold it. Everybody stays in. It's a long-term hold, quarterly cash distributions.
Interesting.
It's interesting. You hit on a lot of points there. One thing I want to talk about is, I know that your podcast is called the Truly Passive Income Podcast. And, whenever I talk to people who watch TikToks or YouTube shorts, they end up saying, oh no, real estate, it's passive. You just get the property. And I think you're going to trigger some people by everything you just described to me. None of that sounded passive.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of the funny thing about our podcast is, like, if we're being really honest with ourselves and with everyone, there is no truly passive income. Now, everything's on a scale, right? Something's going to be like wholesaling or flipping is going to be the most active strategy, because the day you stop working is the day you stop getting paid, right? You got to keep working. Passive is always a scale. For me, I'm an operator. I'm a deal junkie. I love it. And I don't think I'm going to retire. I'm going to take a couple months off a year, but like, this is what I do and I love it. And so for a general partner, it's not passive. For the limited partner investors that we have, their job is to find the operator and look at the deals or the fund offering that they like, and then put their money in. And after that, they can read the monthly updates or the quarterly financial reviews if they want to, or not. At that point, you're sitting back and you're getting checks, right? So for the limited partner standpoint, it is the most passive investment strategy you have out here, with the exception of a savings account or a mutual fund or the stock market, right? Those are going to be the most passive, but typically they're going to give you the least return. If you're trying to make, a 19 to 22% IRR, it's going to be syndication. You're going to either invest in a family's business that you trust implicitly, or you're going to invest with a professional operator and put your money in. What the reality is, even if it just means getting to know somebody, vetting them, and reading through the documents. It requires a little bit of work up front. But the idea is that you establish a group of operators that you know, like, and trust, and that over time you're diversifying in investments across different asset class, different geography, different operators, different variable and fixed rate debt structures, and different maturity dates. And at that point, much like my property management company, people see me now. I have a meeting about once every 3 or 4 months for an hour, usually by Zoom, to make some marketing dollar decisions. Besides that, we just get owners' distributions, and it looks very passive. What the three of us know from the conversation we just had is that's not passive. That's residual, right? It's residual. I just front loaded the work. So there's always a little bit of work involved, but that's the name of the podcast because it was because of where I was as an investor. I was starting the aggressive pursuit of the most passive investment strategies I can find that are going to allow me to achieve those three things: time, location, and financial independence, so that I have an independence of purpose with my life.
Mhm.
You guys have kids?
I sure hope not. Not yet. No, not yet.
And my wife and I we're starting to work on that right now, and that's one of the reasons. Before we had a kid, growing up, both my parents were military,
Yeah.
so they were both having to deploy a lot when I was a kid. So my grandparents raised me, and I wanted to, that's how they were raised too. So I wanted to stop that generational sin. So just due to the way the world works now, it's not really possible for one parent just to take a step back and stop working, and the other parent be able to continue to work. So before my wife and I decided to have kids, I wanted to reach a level of financial independence that once that kid or kids did come, their dad would be able to stay home with them every single day and be able to be there. So I think, like you, I came to the realization that money isn't the ultimate goal. Money
Right.
is great. Money is the great facilitator that we all need for the independence of time, for the independence of purpose, as you say. And for me, it's freedom, true freedom to do what I want when I want without having to have money be in the way every single day. So I'd like to ask you about that. What was it that changed that got you to stop thinking about cash flow, stop thinking about what's the best way for me to make more money with my money? What changed from you to now say, how do I get more time? How do I get more freedom? What was that shift?
Because I did it wrong. You always what you don't. I had the money. I mean, we had basically, my wife was working, I was working, had a great income with a high ceiling, and then we had revenue coming in from these properties. But like, okay, I can't go take a summer off. I can't really leave where we are. I'm either tied there for my job, or even if I'm off of work, we've got these other properties that are really busy the time of year when we would want to go on vacation. And I just realized that I did it wrong. And so that's what started my aggressive pursuit of a different way. Because let's think about it like this: from the kid's perspective is, let's say that you are wildly successful. And I did the same thing. I'm 41, about to be 42, with a 5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. So I waited. But if I leave my kids, we live at the beach. It's not the richest beach out in the world, but there are a lot of people with money. And I grew up very poor as one of 6 kids. And I have concerns about raising children in an environment like that. I don't want them to turn into little jerks, right? So if I leave my kids a bunch of money, in all likelihood, 2 generations later, the money's gone and they're probably bad people, right? So that my idea is like a trust, a family constitution, but more importantly, like, my goal should not be money. And I don't care about things. My job is to live my life in a way that I die with a giant stack of pictures of things I did in beautiful places with people that I love, right? The thing that's more important to my relationship with my children is going to be the amount of time that we get together. So something that's very important to me is travel, not travel for the sake of, drinking Mai Tais somewhere. Travel for the sake of seeing the world, building empathy, and understanding that you should have a sense of gratitude about the country that we live in compared to what a lot of the struggles are that other people deal with, right? So your independence of purpose can be whatever it looks like for you, right? Skiing or fishing or hiking or building or charity work or whatever it needs to be. Hopefully you're living in a way that is building character within your family and have a positive impact on the community around you. But if I give my kids money, 2 generations later, they're probably trashed. If I give them the gift of me being able to have freedom of purpose about my life, and us being able to spend a lot more time together and establish what the relationship between a father and his sons need to look like in terms of trying to have a positive impact on the family and on the world around us, 2 generations later, there's probably a good chance that a lot of that character has passed on if I've done it right, because that dictates the amount of time that they're going to spend with their kids and hopefully so forth. So 5 generations down the line, I think there's a better chance that I'm having descendants that are also looking for freedom of purpose long after my name has been spoken for the last time. And that's so much more powerful than just money, right? So
Mhm.
it's so much bigger than something financial. Let me tell you a quick story. The reason I immediately gravitated to my partners, Eric and Levi Hemingway, their father and son team. Eric Hemingway built his first self-storage facility in 2006. When the market crashed, he was building homes before that. The market crashed in 2008 and no one is building anything. So Eric and his wife, Rachel, and their 5 kids at the time bought a catamaran, 36-foot catamaran sailboat in Greece, sight unseen. And they're going to go sailing until the economy turns around in 6 months, right? Well, 6 months into the trip, nothing's happened with the economy. They find out they're pregnant, didn't want to stop sailing, so they kept sailing, had their 6th kid in Jerusalem, and then kept sailing and lived on the catamaran for 3.5 years. They sailed across the Mediterranean, eventually sailed across the Atlantic and landed back where we are in Wilmington, North Carolina, and got back to building. That trip is what sparked the idea that turned into Nomad Capital, right? A commercial asset, a self-storage facility. It's very easy to manage that provided a nomadic lifestyle for them for 3.5 years while they took that trip. And that eventually turned into what we have today. And the reason it's called Nomad Capital is because a nomad is somebody that goes where they want, when they want, and does what they want. And the only way to do that is you have to break the cycle of trading time for money. If you're a real estate agent or a wholesaler or a flipper or an apartment syndicator and you're buying multifamily and you're making it nice and increasing the rents, and then you have to sell it for everybody to get a payday, at the end of the day, you are still trading time for money. And the day that you stop working is the day that you stop getting paid, right? So the only way that you can get ahead in this generation right now is to have inherited money from your family, somehow get a really high paying job, but live well below your means, which no one does, and save your way to retirement. You're going to trade away the best years of your life paying for somebody else's days off and hope that you're healthy enough at the end that your health span and your lifespan are the same. And they're usually almost never the same. Your only other option is that you're going to have to invest your way there. And so if this is something that the 3 of us are all doing and pursuing, I would challenge you to make sure that you're not investing your way there just for the financial aspect. You need to be looking at the time and location aspect as well. That time, location, independence is key. And if I want to go disappear for 3 or 4 months out of the year and take my boys to Costa Rica and, Guatemala fishing, or Europe, or, the Pacific Northwest or wherever, you can't do that with almost any other type of investment strategy without it suffering, right? It typically is going to take something that has significant economies of scale and that you have a recapitalization plan that doesn't involve selling. What I mean by that is, like, we've got 150 million in assets under management. We've never sold anything. We can do the cash out refinance and have millions and millions of dollars for our investors and ourselves. It's non-taxable. We have kept the projects on stable fixed rate debt that is not over leveraged. We're refinancing to 55 or 60% LTV because of the huge forced appreciation from the asset class conversion. Then we keep it and it rolls on indefinitely in something that's very inflation resistant because everyone is on a month-to-month lease. It's got very low capital expenditures because it's a box of air, no kitchens or bathrooms. So that's the key, is how do you recapitalize yourself and your investors without selling the asset? Because if you have to sell it, no offense, it's a great strategy, but if you zoom out, you're a glorified house flipper. And the day you stop
Yep.
working is the day you stop getting paid.
Yeah.
Do you have any concerns with, in self-storage, one of the biggest amount of people that are continuing to buy that are the baby boomer generation. And once they kind of pass away, I think the younger generation aren't maintaining or keeping things because we never had the experience of going through, or our parents going through the depression and holding on to things. Are you worried that that asset class might be a little bit overused at this point? I here in Arizona, I have 4 of them within like a 2-block radius of my house.
Mhm.
Are you concerned about that on the long term, or do you have an idea that if things were to change, we would just pivot into another investment?
This is a really intelligent question. And it was it was a big concern for me early on. So we spent some money, we did some feasibility studies, and we dug into things, and we've kept a very close eye on this. Because here's why. Your stereotypical idea of storage is what we all think. It's the baby boomers, and it's bulky furniture and heirlooms and Christmas decorations, and it's non-climate controlled, and it's a low slung metal building, and they're in there once or twice a year. And then eventually they die and their family has to clean it out. That's what I always thought too. And here's where we are with the current market cycle. As of 2020, the millennial population is now the largest population segment in the country. They make up 34% of the population. So if they're not using storage, we got a major problem on our hands. So what does the data show? That 34% of the population is currently using 38% of the climate controlled storage. Not storage, climate controlled storage. Why? The reason is because they're using it completely differently than what we've seen before. The baby boomer generation are mostly homeowners. And when you have a home that you own, a lot of times that has a basement, an attic, a garage. The millennial population is no longer able to buy houses the way we once did. They are predominantly renting. Renters, by definition, use more storage than homeowners. When you rent, here's what we're looking at, and this is why we chose our market. We're in secondary and tertiary markets across the Southeast. You're not going to find me in a downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, but you will find one of our facilities 15 miles away in Gastonia, North Carolina. And these small secondary and tertiary markets around these bigger cities are having massive population growth as people are getting pushed out from the more expensive areas. These little towns are having multifamily apartment complexes and condos pop up left and right. They're underserved for storage as is. Our model is we zip into those little towns. Instead of spending 3 to 4 years building a new facility from the ground up, you do the entitlement, engineering, everything else. We want to buy the old Kmart or old textile mill. On average, we can convert that in 12 months and have it open and up and running. And our average cost for the cost of the building, the land, the conversion, everything is just under $65 a square foot. If you built from the ground up, it's going to cost you $120 a square foot plus the cost of the land. And it's going to take you 3 to 4 years. Our model is we do it for half the cost of construction in about a third of the time. And we're nimble in that market. We're going to drop 60, 80, 100,000 square feet of storage right there. It's going to be really hard for anyone else to come into that space. The buildings that we're getting have great residential density, typically 10,000 people in a 1 mile radius, 25,000 in a 3 mile, really good visibility and traffic count. So that's the asset. But those millennials, 34% of the population using 38% of storage, they still have stuff, but it's not the stuff that you already mentioned. What they have is winter clothes, mountain bikes, kayaks, fishing rods, and waders. They need to be able to get into a self-storage facility at 6 a.m. on a Saturday, get their snow bibs and their snowboard, and get out of town. That population segment right now, 32%, I know I'm throwing a lot of stats at you, 32% of all consumers in a climate-controlled storage are in and out of the property multiple times a month because they are using it as an extension of the closet or extension of the garage. These are nicer items, which means they're willing to pay more. They have to keep their winter clothes in climate controlled. That tenant is willing to pay more, and you have less evictions as well. But I would tell this to anybody. If you are doing self-storage these days, it needs to be safe, secure, well-lit, easy access, climate controlled, centrally located. These consumers are showing up. They need to be able to scan a QR code or touchscreen kiosk, get in, get their stuff, and go whatever they're going to go camping for the weekend, but they're coming right there to put it back in when they get back because they would rather do that and pay for a 1-bedroom condo that's $1,300 a month than to pay for a 2-bedroom that's $1,800 a month. They'll pay for a smaller rental space because when you rent, you pay by the square footage, and then they'll get a climate controlled storage unit for $150. So that demographic of who is in your area is really important, and that's part of the feasibility study that determines whether or not a project is going to work. So because of that, I feel the housing crisis in America makes this a very safe asset class for the next decade or two, in my opinion.
Interesting. Do you find that millennials then are getting, because I know like most baby boomers, and of course this is just conjecture, but they're probably getting a 13 by a 13 or a 15 by a 15, like a big thing because they have big bulky items that probably don't stack super well. Do you think that most millennials are getting smaller, maybe like a 7 by 4, just enough to kind of store that in, or are they getting the same size?
It's a mix, right? So I think a lot of it is the individual consumers probably getting it smaller, which is great because that price is higher per square foot for a smaller unit. But we also, that's just the consumers. Right now, 11.1% of all households utilize storage in one form or the other. But that's just residential households. That doesn't count businesses. Drop shipping is huge right now. So drop shipping, are you going to pay for warehouse space, or are you going to rent a 10 by 30 climate controlled self-storage facility? So drop shipping, it basically turning them into micro distribution centers. You also have a ton of businesses that are still moving to the digital space that are shutting down their offices. We had a huge wave of that through COVID. Businesses were shuttering left and right and doing everything online. So they're storing stuff in storage. Now you're having the same thing. Businesses are starting out of storage and just continuing to operate there. And then, of course, during COVID, you had all of a sudden everybody needed a home office. So you would move your bedroom set out into storage and put an office in. So the biggest thing is, as long as there's movement, right? There's 4 stable factors that affect storage. It's called the 4 Ds. It's death, divorce, downsizing, and displacement, right? Your household is either growing or shrinking. You're moving, you've changed jobs, whatever. As long as there's movement, good things are happening. To be honest, storage is having a really, really tough time right now because the housing market is essentially frozen because of the interest rates. How's it doing? Well, it's still doing really well. It's not doing great compared to how it's done over the last 10 years, but it's still doing really well. It's really inflation resistant and obviously a very low cost basis. So you can conjecture as to, what we're seeing with the consumer and how we plan ahead for that. I think as long as it's safe, secure, well lit, easy access, climate controlled, you have that great residential density, good visibility, good traffic count, and ease of access and ease of management and payment. I think that it will continue to be a safe asset class for a long time. The REITs tend to agree there's billions of dollars flowing into storage. It's still a pretty fragmented market. 70% of the storages are individually owned by mom and pops, but it's very quickly consolidating.
Interesting. So I'm kind of curious. You came to this realization of getting into the self-storage business after a multitude of steps, troubles, falls, rises, all that fun stuff. And you tout yourself as a deal junkie. And I love that. Was that something that you were kind of born with, or was that something you kind of developed? It was a mindset you built through experiences and challenges throughout your life. And maybe there's something that you can recommend to our viewers to kind of push ourselves in that area. Because I know not everybody can be a deal junkie, but everybody can benefit in some way or another from improving those skills.
Yeah, there's part of it that is, I do think is personality. I'm a sales guy, so I was used to every month starting over at zero, and you have to get up and rise, kill, and eat. So I've got that fire in the belly that has never gone away, and I always want the next thing. And I like to build a team and take them with me and try to take on some big challenges. So some of that is certainly personality, but also like when I was doing Airbnb or now it's this, you can talk to 100 people that say they all want to do it. And we all know there's only 1 or 2 people that are really going to take action and do anything. So that's part of it. I think analysis paralysis is very, very real for a lot of people. I've been pretty cavalier with my money and the different investment strategies that I've tried. Once I am investing, it's my money, still my money is in the deals too, but now I'm investing other people's money. You got to be really conservative and really careful. And that's when, I can feel like I'm pretty good at recognizing value, but you can't take any shortcuts, and you got to learn to do the underwriting. And again, I would point to the book, Who Not How. If you're looking at something and you think that it's a good opportunity, the question is not how do I pull this off? It's who do I know that can either run a feasibility study and help me understand, is this the deal that I think that I'm seeing? Or what strategic partnership could I bring on where the whole is going to be greater than the sum of its parts if we're really onto something here? So continued aggressive pursuit of what you want in life. And I would say it's going to be a little bit challenging, I think. I would say this to the 3 of us and to the listeners right now. We have a way to connect that no one has ever seen before. The ability to network and the ability to talk to people, and podcasts and education and things like that. Like my first cell phone was a Nokia brick phone. when I was in sophomore in high school, man. Now everybody's got a smartphone, and I think we're taking that advantage. Like we have access to so much data and software on properties. It is my opinion that this generation right here, if you don't do something to drastically and meaningfully change the financial velocity of what things look like for your family, it's a you problem. I think we have so much opportunity in this lifetime. And the kids born now, I think, are just going to be surrounded by so much noise. It's just going to be part of the everyday versus the people that, there were no Facebook groups at one point in time and podcasts and things like that. Right now, if you're questioning, how do I do this, or how do I get ahead, or how do I find deals, or whatever, that implies a lack of, that's just ambiguity. Ambiguity is just a lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge is just a lack of education, and education is free. Right? You've probably all heard of the law of 100 hours. If you spend 100 hours studying something, you're going to know more than 99% of the population on that topic. 100 hours is just 15 minutes a day in the car. That's it. In a year, 15 minutes a day. It's like, 18 minutes, I think, total. Who doesn't have 18 minutes of windshield time, right? And I said this to you before, but like I used to say, if you want to get really smart and learn about something, you need to listen to podcasts, and you should, and I still do. But if you really want to dive deep into a topic, my suggestion is start a podcast. I've learned so much just because people are willing to give me an hour of their condensed life experience. Now, my job is still to get out what we're doing. So when we're here, I'm blabbing away and I talk way too much, and I'm not getting much out of this except for maybe, something for my ego, I guess. But the reality is, the people that I get to ask questions and listen, that's had a profound effect on my ability to get better. And we all want to fall forward, right? We want to, okay, if we're going to fail in the right direction. And our goal really should be, I've talked to 1,500 investors over the last year that we've added to our approved investor list. And I've done 70 podcast episodes over the last year and some change. I'm seeing the same thing over and over. People are telling me their story, and the velocity of where we all end up as an investor. Eventually, we would all rather make a little bit less than actively investing on our own and not have to worry about it. We would all rather get our time back and get our freedom. And I could go flip houses and make 30, 35%. I would rather make 20 to 25% and not have to deal with it, right? We all will get to the point in our lives, if we live long enough, that our time is worth more than anything else. So if I see this same story playing out over and over and over because I've had exposure to all these people, well, why don't I just pick out what's most important to them and what they're building out and invest for that strategy now? Again, I've taken all my retirement dollars, 401k and 2 IRAs, and converted them to self-directed funds that I've placed into other syndication offerings. I'm not allowed to put it into ours. It's called commingling, and it's illegal. But I've put it into other offerings because that is what everyone on the same trajectory as me is doing 20, 30 years from now. So if I can see that and I can start earlier, the most important thing is time and giving myself runway to create that snowball effect. And that's my goal, is in the future to be a professional limited partner investor, keep funding deals with, let the younger guys take over Nomad Capital. I'll keep putting money into those deals, put money into other deals, and utilize my freedom of purpose to have a meaningful life with my family.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. So I'm just kind of curious on where all of your knowledge comes from. I know you said you listen to a lot of podcasts, but you prefer to start the podcast. I love that. And you seem like a really the type of guy that learns as he does. But here on our channel, we talk a lot about books and philosophy and whatnot. I was just curious if you had maybe a top 5 books that you've read over your life that kind of shaped you into the man that you are today.
Well, we all start with the Purple Bible, right? Rich Dad, Poor Dad. We've all read that one. From there, again, Dan Sullivan, Who Not How, was really pivotal for me. As we're building out Nomad, we require every employee in the company. We've got 4 general partners and 16 employees. Everybody has to read the book Traction by Gino Wickman. Unbelievable on building out a system. He uses an analogy of, like, we have our rocks. Like, if I give you a jar and you've got to put rocks and pebbles and sand in there, if you put the sand and the pebbles in first, you're not going to be able to fit the rocks in, right? You have to find what are the big things that goes in first, right? You have to put everything in the right order to make sure it's going to fit and you have the capacity to handle it. So that book is really, really good. Recently, I read the book, What Would the Rockefellers Do? I'm listening to that I've just started it for the second time. I'm probably going to listen to that 3 times. That's about the difference between the Vanderbilt family, which had one of the world's greatest fortunes that was completely gone 3 generations and they died broke, versus the Rockefellers, which used trusts and whole cash value, whole life insurance policies to refill the trust and not giving people access to the principal, and structuring and family constitutions and putting things together in a meaningful way that's not just going to transfer wealth, but hopefully transfer character. That's something that I resonates with me more because of the chapter of life I'm in of having 2 young boys. That's one I would really recommend. That's probably one that I'm going to read every 5 years.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's some great books. We're going to have to add that to the list.
But besides that, you ask, how I learned all this. Everything that you are hearing from me is a combination of knowledge that I learned from other people. This is not me. Like I didn't come up with this. I'm not a guru. I'm not a coach. I'm not teaching courses, and I haven't paid for any of that stuff. And I recommend nobody else do either, unless you really need consultation on a specific thing you're trying to accomplish, and you can find a professional that can help you with that. That's a who, not how. But in terms of overall, gurus and programs and stuff like that, don't do that. There's so many people willing to share, especially with real estate investing. We all talk too much because we're excited, right? It's changed our lives. I'm not trading my life away paying for someone else's days off anymore, right? I had 6 rental properties that flooded 2 weeks ago, and I'm just like, okay, it is what it is. That's what insurance is for. And I have a couple fixed meetings at the office. It's nomad. We encourage people to travel. We encourage people to zoom in from around the world as long as they're doing whatever needs to get done. And if I need to be able dealing with that, and this morning I was ripping out drywall and telling people where to move stuff and doing mold remediation treatment, which is not fun, but I want to be there and be on top of it. People think that being a real estate nomad or having freedom of purpose means you're on that sailboat for 3.5 years in the Mediterranean. And it can mean that. But what if it means that you're there for a family member when they're ill and they really need you, right? What if it means that you have the freedom to go deal with 6 rental properties that flooded instead of being at the hospital putting pacemakers in, right? What if it means that someone has a limited amount of time left in your life and you need to be there in a meaningful way, right? It means that you have the opportunity to prioritize what's going on in your life right then and put what's best for you and your family at the top instead of putting that behind your obligations to somebody else because you're trading your life away for a paycheck.
I'd agree with that. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned from your experience in real estate investing that you wish you knew when you started?
The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I think the biggest thing is, the self-storage conversion projects that we are doing leapt out at me because it's the same thing I was already doing with Airbnbs. I was taking a tiny little quadplex and converting it to Airbnb and quadrupling the rents. And now it's worth so much more and I can refinance it. And when I saw that happening, with a self-storage facility that was converted out of an old Kmart, I was like, holy smokes, this is the same thing. Like, it jumped off the page at me. So adaptive reuse, creative restructuring, conversion, things like that. I think the traditional trajectory is like people are wholesaling or flipping and then finally start keeping some long-term rentals and single families, and they're really slow. So they get into small multifamily, a duplex, a triplex, eventually maybe get into apartments. Eventually they realize if you get over 50 units, you can afford an on-site manager, and actually easier than 220 units. Eventually that guy in his life, 20 years down the road, gets to the point where his time's worth more than anything else. They'd rather sell it all or 1031 and put the money into passive investment strategies, right? And that's the trajectory that they all have. For me, I think that jump when you make it into commercial assets, it is so easy to change the value of those. Like there's a lesson that a friend of mine told me. He took his kids to a Walmart parking lot and he told them to get out and walk around the parking lot until they could find $1. Find change. They're picking up pennies, dimes, nickels, and he told them to go find $1. And they were like, why do we want to do that? We're not doing it. He's like, you don't understand. It's not $1, because if you go find $1, I'll give you $240. And all of a sudden they're like, wait, what? They're scrambling. They're looking. And here's why. If you have a commercial asset and the market is dictating that it's at a 5 cap right now, which is aggressive, but that's what we saw, a year and a half, 2 years ago. At a 5 cap, if you find a way on that commercial asset to increase the rents by $1 a month, that adds $240 to the value of that property. So every time you adjust the rent on a commercial asset up by $1 a month, that's $12 a year. At a 5 cap, which is the multiplier, that adds $240 to the value. If you increase it by $1, all of a sudden you got $240 worth of value. You could refinance and pull out, $160 and keep it, and that's tax-free. And how much is that to a kid that's looking for $1? You know what I mean? I'm oversimplifying here and maybe talking too fast. But the reality is that equity multiplier that comes because the value of a commercial property is dictated by the net operating income. That means if you increase the rents or you lower expenses, the net operating income goes up, and it drastically affects the value of the property. What is your house worth, right? Your house is worth the bricks and sticks and what the neighbor paid for theirs. And that's going to go up and down in value depending on what the neighbors paid for theirs. And it's a comp-based system, right? It's the bricks and sticks and what the guy next door paid. What's a commercial property worth? Well, how much is it bringing in? The amount of money coming in is multiplied through the cap rate, and that's what determines what the value is. So the better you are at operating it, we take an old Kmart that nobody wants because Amazon has killed that space and nobody wants 100,000 square feet of big box retail. We take that big box, we break it up into 600 or 700 little boxes. People rent them all out. The net operating income shoots through the roof. All of a sudden, that building that people drove past for 12 years is now worth $13 to $15 million. That's the power of commercial real estate. So that's the thing. I think people should fast forward, look around you and learn. And the biggest question is, how do I save 10 years of my life? Like, where do I want to be 10 years from now? Mm-hmm. Or where does that guy want to be 10 years from then? Like, what's the final goal? Let's start there and work backwards, right? Like, the farther out you are and the more time you give yourself, if you're 1,000 miles away from your destination, you can change your course by 1 degree in a sailboat, and you're going to miss it by 100 miles in one direction or the other. The closer you get, if you're not on course, you have to make a really big adjustment to try to land where you want to be. So the farther out you can be, if you can see where you want to go and just make sure you're aiming for it. And in my opinion, it's not residential real estate. You should be looking to move towards commercial assets, small strip mall, commercial mom and pop centers that don't have a website, undervalued, need a rent increase, things like that. That's going to get you where you want to be faster because you can change the value of that by $1 million in 6 months. Mm-hmm. You can't do that on any residential property anywhere.
Mm-hmm. So for someone like me, right? I want to get started in real estate. I started looking into doing wholesaling, stuff like that, right? The super bottom of the rung, easiest way to get started. Obviously, like I was telling you before, my dad did single family homes. Me personally, I wanted to go into multifamily, but I've always seen these storage units as well and seen like, wow, it's so nice not having to give up your Saturday to go fix a toilet. It's so nice not having to go repair a roof. And that's just not fun at all. Do you think with keeping the time, the financial, the location goal, independence goal in mind, someone like me who wants a kind of not necessarily your life, but the freedom, the time, everything you talked about, should I skip that? Or do you think it's more of it's a character builder? Like you have to go through these crappy things like, the toilet fixes and all this crap? Or do you think would it be a better move to just find those, like you said, most of the storage units are owned by baby boomers who they're not modern facilities like yours that you could maybe sell or finance it or something like that and really upgrade their business like that? Or what do you think would be the best path for the viewers or even myself?
All right. Great question. I think I have an answer on this, but I've never thought through this before. I've never said this before, so I'm not sure how this is going to come out. Okay. But I think it would be, if I was in your situation, I would do a blend of the two. if we know this about wholesalers, you're trading your time for money and you're trading your hustle, right? You don't have a lot of money to go get started, but what you do have is hustle and you got drive and you can figure it out, right? So what we see among wholesalers, the people that are good at it start making some decent money. And then you start to figure out that you're selling these typically to other investors, a lot of times flippers, and they're making more than you. So then you're going to start keeping a few deals and flip a few on your own, and you're going to fail at a few and you're going to do okay at some. And then eventually 5 years down the road, you're going to realize, man, I have to keep working because if I stop getting paid. Then you're going to start thinking about keeping some of these properties for yourself, single families, and maybe a duplex here and there. Eventually, you're going to figure out that that's a really slow way to get ahead. And as you start a family, you're going to want to slow down on the wholesaling side unless you really systematize it. And that's where people start moving into the mid-levels and the commercial assets. So that's if you're swimming upstream, right? So how do we fast forward to think 10 years backwards? What I would do if I was you is, the character building. Yeah, like you got to learn how to do all the hard stuff. Like that's important, but you're going to get that anyway. I would do this. I would do wholesaling. I would try to get really, really good at it. And you're going to have to build a buyer's list. I would build 2 buyer's lists. I would build a buyer's list of people that are going to find the single and double hits that you're getting as you're wholesaling these different properties. I would also look at when you're focusing your marketing, I would focus on commercial assets as well, and also probably land. And I would try to be buying a second. You need to get really good at seeing a property, understand the value, understand what it could be, and get good at commercial underwriting. And then you have a separate buyer's list that are people that could take down a project like that, right? Like that's not your average little house flipper. That's somebody that's a little bit higher up. You find a really good deal, and then one by one, you go down that list and you shop it to them. Be like, look, I've got this property under contract. It's off market. This is what it is. This is what it could be worth. I can get this, I can sell it to you. But what I would rather do is I've already negotiated this rate. Instead of upselling it to you, I would rather us close on this property together. If you'll be the capital partner, let's close on this together. I'd like a small piece of the equity. I'd like to be a part of the deal, and let's execute this business plan, and it should be worth this. If you find 1 or 2, 3 properties like that and 1 or 2, 3 investors like that, you're going to get a piece of equity in those projects. That's going to be something that you can add to your portfolio. And you might look, these are all the facilities that I own or am partnered on. This is what we did. You're building a huge track record right there. But what you're really building is equity in those relationships with capital partners that know how to do things. So instead of just focusing on smaller wholesale properties that you can make 5 to 10 to 15 grand a pop on, I would be using the same marketing machine to focus on land and larger commercial properties, and then individually try to shop those out to people that you are looking up to, that you know, like, and trust, that you want to emulate, and the people that you would want to be in business with, and put the deal and package it together, not just with the building, but try to put together some underwriting and a business plan, shop that to them for a piece of the equity, because you're going to get more out of it by a relationship with them and hopefully access to capital with them in the future if it works bigger. Because you're trying to work your way up the food chain by creating equity in those relationships and taking on bigger and bigger projects. That's going to take strategic partnership when you're punching above your weight. So I would use wholesaling as a vehicle, not just to make money, but to think ahead of where you want to be 10 years and focus on those deals, those investors, and build those relationships and be a deal assassin. Come to them with something, be like, look, I did the hustle on this. I found this. I know that you're the type of person that could take this down. I have it under contract. Here's what I propose. And they're going to be like, man, I've got this young guy hitting the pavement. He's an absolute deal assassin. He brings me stuff and then we do it together. All I got to do is put up the money. That's a win-win, right? And it's not going to be easy, but I'm sure people are doing it. And you can do that if you think faster than, how do I be the best wholesaler I can be? How do I use wholesaling as a tool to get to the next level, which is significant equity positions in large commercial properties?
Bingo. That's a beautiful response. That is a beautiful response. That's one of those responses that I'm going to have to watch back a few times and really let that soak in, and maybe set it as my alarm clock, wake up to it. I like that.
Me too. I kind of blacked out. I'm not really sure what I said.
No, I loved it. We'll watch it back together.
I do that too sometimes on the podcast. You block out for 5 minutes, all of a sudden you come back in. You're like, what did I say?
Why am I sweating?
Yeah, exactly. Like, damn, is it hot in here, man? I know it's Arizona, but damn. Heck yeah.
Now,
Okay. Yeah.
I got one final question for you, Clint.
Mm.
For before we close out here, I want to be respectful of your time. You mentioned a lot today about specific things we can do to get better with our finances, but I think all of it comes down to, and you mentioned this a few times, your mindset. So, how important is mindset to achieving independence of purpose? And what practices can Dominic and I and our viewers would you recommend for maintaining a positive and a growth oriented mindset moving forward? Because none of this is easy. Yeah, you can
Uh,
say like just do it, but someone still has to take that action of going and do it. And that's what I struggle with in helping our audience members is, yeah, I can tell you everything to do. I can lead you to water, but I can't make you drink.
Yeah, when you start trying to do bigger things that are going to really affect your life in a big way, they take time, right? And it takes time to develop. The relationships take time to develop, the underwriting, the capital raising, the construction, everything. It takes time. And so because of that, I think you have to understand that it's not going to be easy, and it's going to be really hard to hold yourself in a good positive headspace all the time. You have to understand that it's going to take some patience, and more importantly, for yourself and everyone involved, it's going to require some grace. And that means grace for yourself. And if you're having a tough day and you're just something knocks you down, I mean, this is the type of business that has really high highs and really low lows, and they can come back to back pretty quickly. You just have to give yourself some grace and keep the end goal in mind. And I would say that one of the most important things is make sure that your relationship with your spouse or partner is solid and that you're both in it together, right? You need to have continuity that, listen, we are going to do some big things with our lives. This is what it's going to look like. Like, you know, a goal without a timeline is just a dream, right? It needs to be like, at this age, this is the physical shape I want to be in. This is the emotional and physical shape I want to be in. These are the experiences I want to have accomplished. And this is the quality of relationship I want to have in my wedding vows, right? Those things have to be established and prioritized. And everything else outside of that, you can try to hype yourself up. You need to be surrounded by positive people. You need to be a positive influence on the people around you. But you also need to learn how to have grace for them and grace for yourself, because there's going to be ups and downs. And, I think support is important. Networking is important. Friends and family are important in making sure that you're not isolating yourself and just focusing on what you're trying to do, that you remember that, what we're doing this all for is some sense of community, and make sure that your relationships are stable. That's the most important thing, right? If you lose that, then what are we all doing it for? And outside of that, I would say patience and grace.
Yeah.
Well, Clint, I really want to thank you for coming on to the podcast today and teaching our audience so much. Um, from my standpoint, what I've always taught is to be truly passive. We're just going to go into the market and you're just going to put yourself into a broad market index and then you're just going to kind of leave it alone. But I love bringing on people like yourself who say, yes, you can do that. And there's a different way that may be able to get you there a little bit faster. Maybe it's a little bit more work, but for that little bit more work, there is a, possibility of a better return for doing that. So I just always want to tell our audience that there is a million different ways to skin a cat. I
Right.
hate that analogy, but it really is true. There's not just one way to achieving financial independence or independence of purpose. And
I
because all of us, we also have different goals too. What our independence of purpose is, what our independent or financial independence means to me might be different to you, Clint, to Dominic, to our listener. And, there's just so many different ways. So take what Clint said here today and bring it into your own schema of life and say, does this work for me? Just because it works for Clint, that doesn't mean it has to work for me, because we can all get to the same place or our ultimate destination by different paths.
Yep. Totally agree. It's not mutually exclusive, right? I'm not saying that the stock market is bad and you should just do this. These are tools, right? My job is not to sell our syndication as a whole, or self-storage to anybody. My job is to educate, and I educate based upon what I've learned and what I've known. But what I will say is that I think that syndication and self-storage is very likely something that you should have in your tool belt as an investor that you know about. And it may not be right for you right now, but there probably is a very good likelihood, based upon what I'm seeing, the trajectory of the average investor, that it will have a place in your portfolio at some point in the future. And it can't be there if you don't know about it. And that's the point of, that's why we're all doing this. We're all just want to learn.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I know I learned a lot today. I got a lot to look up and some wonderful actionable advice, and hopefully our listeners do as well. Any final thoughts for you guys? Anything you want to plug? Your podcast, obviously.
Sure. I would love for people to check us out on Truly Passive Income if they'd like to, but you don't have to. That's fine too. It's honestly more for a way for me to learn. But besides that, if you're interested in what we're doing at Nomad or self-storage in general, our website is nomadcapital.us, or you can email me, clint@nomadcapital.us, or go to the website and schedule a call. Obviously, my job is to raise capital for our deals, but besides that, I'm an investor first. Always happy to learn, always happy to share, and happy to connect with anybody.
And Clint, I know you said it earlier, but I'm going to have to ask it because we ask every one of our guests. Financial independence means something to different people. And I know you've already talked about it with purpose for yourself, but what does financial independence mean for you? What is your ultimate goal?
I think for me, it means, what kind of character does my great-great-grandson have, right? Because the financial side of things, when combined with time and location independence, gives me an independence of purpose. And if I live my life correctly, it has the opportunity to affect my sons and hopefully their sons in a meaningful way. And long after I'm dead and my name has been said for the last time, that character likely will have implanted on the generations after that. And that's a legacy that's much more important than.
That's beautiful. Clint, thank you so much for joining us today. And to our viewers, please tell your friends about the Fi Guys. Bring one person along for this journey. If you found, somebody who is interested in self-storage, real estate, send them this podcast. Let them know. Let's spread the word, because the fire really is spreading, and we want to make sure that we bring as many people along on this boat as we possibly can.
With that being said, guys, that's our podcast. Clint, appreciate you. We'll see you on the next one. We're the Fi Guys, and see you on Friday, guys. Later.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
This video podcast is sponsored by Mons on Wealth. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. We do not endorse specific products or services. Past performance does not guarantee future results. The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests, not the podcast sponsor.
It is crucial to consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional who can provide advice tailored to your specific needs before making any financial decisions, investments, or taking any other actions. If you are seeking specified help, you can reach out to Chris at monsonwealth.com.